So I'm currently co-leading a spiritual retreat with Father Barber, and we'll be posting the Zoom calls on YouTube for those who are wanting to participate but can't make the meetings, either all the time or some of the time. So we had our first call last night, but not all of it got recorded. So I'll just do a little bit of the introduction again. Right. So this season is really multifaceted. We have coming up next week is the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which includes Passover and the Day of First Fruits, which I'll go into in a little bit. But so to get more out of this season from a Christian perspective, it's really helpful to look at it from a Jewish perspective and to see what Jesus would have been doing every year of his life. And I believe personally what God would still like us to be doing. So, the multifacetedness of this season. So, this whole season of celebration started with Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, out of slavery. And parallel to that, Jesus leads us out of slavery to sin, which we'll go over in the retreat quite a bit with those passages. And so the Feast of Unleavened Bread is like an umbrella for this season. And the idea behind it is cleaning out all the leaven from our houses and from our hearts. So it's a very sacramental holiday, which really the Jewish way of being, way of living, feasts are very sacramental and experiential. So with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we're told to remove all the leaven from our homes. And traditionally, I've learned that within the Jewish cultures, women would clean the house of all the leaven, but they would hide a little bit for the man of the house to find. And so the man would come and find the leaven that's left in the house, and then he would take that, which is probably like bread that's risen, and he would take that into the town square and then burn it in the fire, as symbolically all the leaven is cleaned from our house. And I think that's really a beautiful picture of how we're to search our hearts and find even the hidden leaven in our lives and destroy it and burn it. Not just put it aside so that later on, after the feast is over, we can take it back again, but actually get rid of the leaven that's in our hearts, which oftentimes leaven is referring to sin in our lives. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts with Passover, and Jesus is our Passover lamb. And he's really even more than our Passover lamb, but he fulfills the Passover lamb. And there's so much symbolism within the Passover feast that Jesus fulfills, and we'll be going over that throughout the week. And the timing for this year in particular is just really special. So actually, I'll say the timing generally, not even this year, but generally is special, where Jesus was brought into Jerusalem on the 10th, which is when all the lambs would be being brought into Jerusalem to be examined. And then when the Passover lambs were killed on the 14th, Jesus was killed. And then on the day of first fruits, which is an appointed time from the time of Moses, Jesus rose from the dead as our first fruit. And so I'll actually put a link in the description to a video that talks about, the title is actually something like, was the Last Supper a Passover meal? And it goes through the timeline of this period of time, of this feast period, and shows through the scriptures how Jesus had to have died on Passover, rose on first fruits, and entered into the city when all the Passover lambs were entering. So it's really special and remarkable. And then this year, 2023, is extra special because all the calendars align. So this year, the Hebrew calendar has Passover on Wednesday, which is when Jesus would have died, been crucified. And then this year also, the Day of First Fruits lines up with the Gregorian calendar's Easter. So and then there's a whole controversy over why we celebrate Easter when we celebrate Easter. So, and I can put a link to that as well. It's an article that I read. And initially, there were Christians that were celebrating Easter according to the Hebrew calendar. And what's tricky is that the Hebrew calendar is very local to what's happening with the barley harvest in Israel, because with the Day of First Fruits, you actually wave it, you offer the first fruits of the barley harvest. So it's important that the barley is ready. So Passover, when to celebrate Passover, when to celebrate first fruits, when to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread generally is dependent on the barley harvest in Israel. So originally the Christians that were living near Israel celebrated Jesus's resurrection. They celebrated Passover and his resurrection according to the Hebrew calendar, with the resurrection being on the Day of First Fruits. But then in other parts of the world, further from Jerusalem, Christians were just guessing on when to celebrate it based on the spring equinox. It's like, it's sometime in spring, let's do it now. And so at some point, I think it was the Council of Nicaea, they decided, we all should be celebrating at the same time. Let's have unity in when we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. And because the doing it according to the Hebrew calendar is so localized to what's happening in Israel, let's just do it based on the spring equinox. And we're going to celebrate it on Sunday because that's when when the women discovered the tomb was empty. So we'll celebrate on Sunday according to the spring equinox, and that way we're all on the same page. And then even still, Christians were disagreeing, like they weren't calculating the spring equinox the same. And so when in doubt, they decided the Pope gets to decide when we celebrate Easter. So that's a little bit of the Easter controversy on how they decided when to celebrate Easter. So this year is extra special, where Easter actually aligns with the Day of First Fruits according to the Hebrew calendar, and Passover aligns with Wednesday, which is when Jesus actually would have died. And so 2023 is just extra special, which actually inspired this retreat, this spiritual retreat, because it's a really neat opportunity to walk through with what was happening with Jesus on those days that they would have been happening, and it aligns with the Hebrew calendar and the Gregorian calendar this year. So, actually, I think I'm going to do another video. So that is what is special about this retreat and this season in particular, is all the calendars align. And for us as Christians, we can learn so much and connect with God so much more, I believe, by looking at things from how he set it up from the beginning. So what's cool about the feasts, there are 7 feasts mentioned in Leviticus 23. There are 3 spring feasts and 3 fall feasts, and then there's the weekly Sabbath. And the 3 spring feasts have all been fulfilled by Jesus already. The 3 fall feasts will be fulfilled probably in his second coming. And then I personally believe the Sabbath will be fulfilled during the millennial reign. We'll see. But so right now we'll be studying the Feast of Unleavened Bread and then the Day of First Fruits, which is actually an appointed time, not actually a feast, because God doesn't tell us to eat on that day. But nonetheless, it's a special day. Okay, so pick up with me in the next video to talk about the spiritual exercises.